For most of its life, Pixar's Cars has carried a strange reputation. Released in 2006, at the height of the studio's golden age, it was immediately dismissed as the weakest entry in their filmography. Too slow, too sentimental, and too drenched in merchandising to stand along the likes of Toy Story, Monsters, Inc., or The Incredibles. And yet, nearly 2 decades later, Cars is one of Pixar's most enduring cultural landmarks. Its characters have outlived critical dismissal, its imagery has become iconic, and in 2012, Radiator Springs was rebuilt brick by brick inside Disney's California Adventure, transforming the film into an immersive world people could actually step into. Cars went from being considered a mediocre entry in the Pixar canon to a billion-dollar institution. How did this happen? Well, to answer that, we have to look at Cars as both a film, its themes, aesthetics, and critical reception, and as a cultural object whose afterlife tells us much more about Pixar, Disney, and nostalgia as it does about Lightning McQueen. To understand why Cars developed such a complicated reputation, we need to start at the beginning. June 2006. By this point, Pixar had built an almost spotless track record. Toy Story, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, films that weren't just critical successes, but cultural landmarks. Each release seemed to raise the bar for what mainstream animation could accomplish. Narratively ambitious, emotionally resonant, and visually groundbreaking. Cars, by contrast, felt smaller, and critics took notice. Reviews at the time often described Cars as technically stunning, but narratively simplistic. Roger Ebert praised its craftsmanship, but called the story predictable. The New York Times noted the film's comfortable nostalgia, but suggested it lacked the emotional complexity of earlier Pixar features. Even among fans, there was a sense that Cars was a step backward, a film more interested in selling toys than in advancing the art form. The perception was compounded by context. Cars arrived after The Incredibles, arguably Pixar's most sophisticated film to that point, and just before Ratatouille, which would redefine animated storytelling through auteur-driven artistry. Sandwiched between those two, Cars looked quaint, a pastoral fable about slowing down in a forgotten desert town. Thematically earnest, visually groundbreaking, but tonally out of step with the trajectory of Pixar's golden age. For critics and audiences accustomed to Pixar delivering grand allegories about family, grief, or the human condition, Lightning McQueen's coming-of-age story felt insubstantial. Sentimentality, which had often been Pixar's greatest strength, was now reframed as a weakness, and the film's close association with merchandising only confirmed the suspicion that Cars was less an artistic statement than a corporate one. Yet, as we'll see, dismissing Cars as the weakest Pixar film is less a reflection of its actual thematic weight and more a product of expectation, because at its core, Cars isn't about spectacle or innovation. It's about something deceptively simple. What we lose when progress erases community. It's this theme, overlooked in 2006, that would later make Cars resonate far beyond its initial critical reception. On the surface, Cars tells a familiar story. An arrogant athlete humbled by unexpected circumstances. Lightning McQueen is the archetypal hotshot who must learn the value of humility, community, and friendship. As a narrative, it's hardly groundbreaking, and perhaps that familiarity is one reason critics dismissed it. But beneath its conventional structure lies one of Pixar's most thematically focused films. Cars is, above all else, a meditation on time and loss. Radiator Springs, the sleepy desert town where most of the story unfolds, is less of a backdrop than a character in its own right, a fossil of a bygone America. Once a bustling stop on Route 66, it has become bypassed, both literally and figuratively, by the interstate system. Progress, embodied by endless highways and endless speed, has erased it from the map. What Lightning McQueen encounters in Radiator Springs is not just a group of small town characters, but the ghost of a culture that has been left behind. This is where the film's sentimentality becomes something more than kitsch. Cars frames nostalgia not as simple longing for the past, but as an interrogation of what is lost in the pursuit of modernization. When Doc Hudson, a former racing champion turned reluctant town doctor, tells Lightning that the town got bypassed just to save 10 minutes of driving, the line crystallizes the film's central anxiety. In our obsession with efficiency and speed, what human, or in this case, communal connections, are we sacrificing? In this sense, Cars operates within a distinctly American tradition, a pastoral elegy. It longs for the handmade, the local, the communicable in the face of mass production and corporate spectacle. The film's pacing, which critics derided in 2006, is itself an act of thematic consistency. Cars asks its audience to slow down, to sit with Radiator Springs and its residents, to see value in stillness rather than spectacle. What looked like a narrative flaw may in fact be the film's most daring choice. Most importantly, this thematic clarity aligns Cars more closely with Pixar's core identity than its detractors admitted. The studio's best films often wrestle with loss and change, from Andy outgrowing his toys to Marlin confronting the inevitability of Nemo's independence. Cars places that same emotional framework in a uniquely American key, not the loss of family or innocence, but the loss of place, history, and communal memory. It's quieter, perhaps less universal, but no less resonant. This is the foundation upon which Carr's cultural afterlife would be built, because the world Pixar created, a world defined by nostalgia, Americana, and the tension between progress and preservation, turned out to be perfectly suited for expansion beyond the screen. If Cars was dismissed in 2006, its reputation began to shift in 2012, not because of critical reevaluation, but because of architecture. That summer, Disney's California Adventure unveiled Cars Land, a meticulously detailed recreation of Radiator Springs. It was more than just another theme park expansion. It was a full scale act of world building. For the first time, audiences could step directly into the landscape Pixar had imagined, surrounded not by animation, but by concrete, neon, and rock work that towered over the park. In doing so, Cars Land reframed the film's legacy. What critics saw as saccharine nostalgia on screen became an environment where nostalgia was the entire point. Cars Land allowed guests to inhabit the very values Radiator Springs represented: community, leisure, and the pleasure of slowing down. Walking through Route 66, visitors experience the handcrafted neon signs, the carefully aged facades, and the natural beauty of Cadillac Range. The land transformed Radiator Springs from a sentimental backdrop into a living town, validating Pixar's thematic vision through sheer physical presence. This is where Cars' supposed weaknesses became strengths. Its narrow focus, its small town Americana, and its even slower pace, all of these made it uniquely well suited for translation into a theme park land. The Incredibles or Ratatouille may be more critically acclaimed, but their worlds are harder to inhabit in the same way. Radiator Springs, by contrast, was already designed to feel lived in, textured, and communal. Cars Land crystallized this design, turning Pixar's most minor world into one of Disney's most immersive environments. And this matters because cultural memory is not shaped only by the screen. Theme parks serve as powerful tools of canonization, cementing certain films as more significant than their box office or critical reception might suggest. Cars Land did not just celebrate the film, it actively reshaped how audiences remembered it. For children who grew up visiting the parks, Cars was no longer the weakest Pixar film. It was a cornerstone of their Disney experience, inseparable from the joy of physically being in Radiator Springs. In this sense, Cars Land functioned as cultural redefinition. It rescued Cars from the margins of Pixar's golden age and placed it at the center of Disney's physical storytelling. The film's reputation was no longer defined by critics, but by experience. The thrill of racing through Ornament Valley, the glow of neon at dusk, the sense of belonging to a town that, in fiction, had been forgotten. Radiator Springs endured not in spite of progress, but because Disney reimagined it as a place where progress and nostalgia could coexist. By bridging the gap between screen and space, Cars Land did what no review could. It proved that Cars had staying power, and in doing so, it turned what had once been Pixar's weakest film into one of its most culturally indelible. Nowhere is this reclamation clearer than in Radiator Springs Racers, the land's signature attraction. From the day it opened, it became California Adventure's crown jewel, not a slow burn legacy ride like Pirates of the Caribbean or Haunted Mansion, but an instant classic. Almost overnight, it redefined the park's identity, turning Cars from Pixar's most derided property into the beating heart of Disney's most ambitious expansion. Part of that success lies in how elegantly the ride translates the film's thematic arc into physical form. It begins quietly, with a leisurely drive through Ornament Valley. Guests pass the same landmarks Lightning and Sally once explored, accompanied by the hum of the desert and the illusion of an open road. It's not a spectacle, at least not yet. It's immersion, an invitation to slow down and savor the landscape. From there, the ride shifts gears into a classic Disney dark ride, complete with animatronics, character encounters, and gentle storytelling. Here, the residents of Radiator Springs repeatedly remind the guests of two things: the importance of slowing down and the anticipation of a race to come. Only after that lesson is absorbed does the ride reveal its final act. Guests are fitted with new tires or a fresh paint job, then pull up to a starting line alongside another car. Guido counts us down, the engine revs, and suddenly Radiator Springs Racers transforms into a full speed race through Ornament Valley. At 45 miles per hour, Faster than Space Mountain or Matterhorn, riders experience the exhilaration of Lightning McQueen's world, the roar of the engine, the high banked turns, the rush of competition. The victory is brief, but the sensation lingers. What began as stillness and community culminates in speed and thrill, but never loses its grounding in Radiator Springs. In this way, Radiator Springs Racers becomes more than a theme park ride. It is Cars distilled, an experiential retelling of the film's emotional journey. The fact that it achieved instant classic status on opening day, not just a testament to Disney Imagineering, but proof of the film's underlying thematic strength. If Cars were truly the weakest Pixar film, its world would not have been capable of sustaining an attraction that is so universally beloved. Radiator Springs Racers didn't just enhance Cars' reputation, it redefined it. By the time Cars Land opened, the reputation of Pixar's Cars was already shifting, not among critics, but among audiences. Children who grew up with Lightning McQueen and Mater were now teenagers, and their nostalgia for the franchise was cemented through toys, video games, and sequels that, while critically maligned, kept the characters alive in the cultural imagination. Cars had become less a single film than a brand, a set of icons that transcended its original narrative. The sheer scale of merchandising played a role in this endurance. Cars is estimated to have generated more than 10 billion in merchandise sales, making it one of the most lucrative properties in Disney's portfolio. For many families, Cars was not just a film, but a collection of die-cast models, lunchboxes, and birthday party themes, physical objects that embedded Lightning McQueen and Mater into their daily lives. This ubiquity inevitably shaped its cultural afterlife. What critics once dismissed as corporate excess became, for a generation of children, the very reason Cars endured. At the same time, Cars began to find a second life in digital culture. The internet embraced its strangeness, turning Radiator Springs and its inhabitants into memes, ironic remixes, and surrealist humor. This online afterlife, equal parts affectionate and mocking, paradoxically ensured Cars' continued relevance. A film that had been labeled forgettable became unforgettable precisely because it lingered in the cultural imagination, however distorted. Most importantly, Cars now benefits from the passage of time. For a generation of viewers, Lightning McQueen is not a weak link in Pixar's golden age, but a defining childhood figure. Just as The Fox and the Hound or Oliver and Company inspire affection disproportionate to their critical reputations, Cars is now remembered less for its reviews than the emotions it inspired in young audiences. Cars Land only amplified that nostalgia, providing a physical space for those memories to be relived and renewed. Taken together, these elements, the merchandising empire, the meme economy, the generational nostalgia, and the legitimization of Cars Land, have rewritten the legacy of Cars. No longer the weakest Pixar film, it now stands as one of the studio's most culturally indelible works, and perhaps more than any other Pixar property, it demonstrates that a film's legacy is not determined at release, but through the unpredictable alchemy of audience attachment, corporate synergy, and cultural afterlife. When Cars first arrived in 2006, it was easy to dismiss. Compared to Pixar's towering achievements, it felt smaller, slower, and less ambitious. Critics interpreted its sentimentality as weakness and its merchandising as cynicism. But here we are nearly 2 decades later, and Cars has proven to be one of Pixar's most enduring films. Not because of box office numbers or glowing reviews, but because its themes of community, nostalgia, and resistance to unchecked progress found new life beyond the screen. Cars Land turned Radiator Springs into a living place, inviting audiences to step directly into the world that the film imagined. Radiator Springs Racers distilled Lightning McQueen's journey into an experiential narrative, making the film's emotional arc tangible in ways critics never could have imagined. Meanwhile, merchandise, memes, and generational nostalgia embedded the characters into popular culture until they became inseparable from Disney's identity. The story of Cars, then, is not just a story of a film, but of its afterlife. It reminds us that cinematic legacy is not determined solely by critical consensus or opening weekend box office. Instead, legacy is a negotiation between art, commerce, and culture, a process in which audiences, corporations, and even theme parks all play a role. Cars began as Pixar's weakest link, but it has endured as something greater, a testament to the ways cultural memory can transform even the most underestimated stories into phenomena. Peace, plants, namaste.